All right, my friends, happy to be here. Happy to have a very awesome guy with us today. Scot Westwater is a master of audio technology for helping that build your business and having the voice be what it is that controls things. And I'm just looking forward to Scot sharing his wisdom with me. I probably messed that up because I'm not nearly as experienced as Scot is on this. So I'm going to just lean on his experience, his expertise, his technical wizardry. This is all about helping you build your business with the use of your voice. And I was noticing there was Google and other different voice command technologies involved in this, Scot, when I was reading your bio and checking you out for the this interview. And it was very intriguing, and I'm very, very excited to hear what you have to say about this. So welcome to the group, everybody. Happy to have you here. If you happen to be able to catch us live, love to have your comments or questions for Scot as we go. And welcome, Scot.
Dean, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
It is. I'm really excited about this whole thing because I know it's going to be something like where I'm going to say, wow, I didn't even have a clue that that was possible. So we're obviously talking with Scot Westwater. He's the CCO and co-founder of Pragmatic Digital. Now, I'm just curious, when you CCO, is that Chief Creative Officer?
It is.
Awesome. Okay.
And it's actually funny because there's so many parallels when you use acronyms. Some people go, oh, you're the chief content officer. Well, Susan, my co-founder / wife, is actually our content person. So I probably need to start spelling it out a little bit just so it's a little bit clearer. But yeah, no, you nailed it.
Awesome. That'll probably be the last time today. So that's awesome. Welcome, Scot. I'm really happy to have you here, my friend. And I'm going to get right into the interview, and I'm just going to get you to share your background with us and what it is that had you go build Pragmatic Digital and go with voice technology for business development, brother. Go ahead.
Well, it actually started back in 2017. I had my father passed away unexpectedly, and he worked in HR for his entire career, and he got to retirement, and it wasn't exactly what he thought it was going to be. And so that was a big wake-up call for me. I was in my early 40s. And basically, do I want to continue down this path and maybe repeat the same mistakes that my father did? Or can I take this as an opportunity to, really identify what I'm passionate about, what I'm interested in, and where I can really make an impact? And so around the same time, Gary Vaynerchuk was talking a lot about voice technology and using Amazon Alexa to, make purchases and things like that. And at the time, I was a director of user experience at an agency in Chicago who, I had access to all these research tools and, just other things that I had already done. I'd seen the early days of the web. I'd seen the early days of mobile. And so when I started looking into it and looking at the numbers and adoption of consumers and, what people are doing with it, I went, this is it. This is the huge opportunity that's going to, be, computing for the next, say, decade or plus. And so that was really kind of the epiphany moment. Talked to my wife, Susan, who, again, I said she was on the content side. She was working at a large enterprise leading their content practice. And we basically said, we let the web pass us by because it was early in our careers. We let mobile pass us by because we weren't quite ready. Let's not let this opportunity pass us by.
Right.
And so what we started to do was taking all of our experience in digital marketing, user experience, content strategy, and said, all right, how do we apply that thinking to this new thing called voice to help, agency owners and brands really figure out what the opportunity is for them? And that's really what we're doing right now.
Awesome. And the beautiful thing is that you're on the leading edge. I know AI is just coming in, and I'm sure that AI plays a factor in voice.
Huge role.
Could you share a bit about that with us?
Yeah, so there's really a couple of thoughts around that. So AI really powers voice, and it's really the understanding of the natural language. It's basically what makes the decisions. If you ask a question, what answer you get. Right. So we like to think of the AI component as really the back end part of your voice experience. It's very technical. There's a lot of considerations. There's a lot of, again, things we can take from web and mobile and content to help identify what the right stuff is to put into the AI system. But that's really what is powering these experiences.
Cool.
On the front end, it's really figuring out what content your audience is looking for. And if you're a brand or a business and you've been doing this for any amount of time, you've probably mapped out your customer journey. You probably know what messages already resonate and what questions your audience has. So it's a matter of matching up that intelligence with the AI system so that when someone asks a question to an Alexa or a Google Assistant or whatever, they get the right answer.
Cool, cool. And through all of this, I'm sure you've been through lots of different technologies, different platforms, different resources. What would you say is, for someone that wants to get this going in their business, what would be the best resource for them to start with?
Well, a really good resource, selfishly, is our book. So we wrote a book called Voice Strategy, awesome. Which really, the first third talks about, here's the opportunity that voice represents for your business, your brand. So talking about voice search, the opportunities to create voice experiences, almost like an iPhone or a Google app, and really figuring out what the right thing to do is for your audience. And then the last 2/3 of the book are actually our processes, tools, techniques, things we do to actually bring these to life for clients. So our book is a really good starting point. We've had a lot of great feedback from folks that are technical, and then also folks that aren't technical. And they're like, we understand what the opportunity. So that's a really good resource. Obviously, if you're looking to something for the Amazon platform, a bunch of resources that Amazon provides. Google does this thing. Unfortunately, our friends at Apple haven't really opened things up to third-party development. So there's not a lot we can do yet. But a big trend that we're already starting to see, and I expect to continue to see, is adding voice to existing mobile apps. So if you have a mobile app, if there's an opportunity to allow your user to use voice to command the app or to find information, that's going to be a huge opportunity. And we're already seeing brands starting to build voice command and control into existing iPhone and Android apps.
Wow, very cool. I know I have a speech recognition app on my Windows system where I can speak to it and it converts it into text. Yep. But what you're talking about is a huge difference. You're able to give commands outside of apps and to integrate other processes in your computer system, in your business. Could you talk to that? Talk to us about that a bit.
Sure. So it's actually funny that you bring up dictation. So the way we wrote our book is we actually used our voices. And so I'm not necessarily a writer by trade. Susan is a double English major, and she's got the bona fides, but I was always on the visual side of things when it came to art direction and design. So for me, sitting down with a blank screen to type was just really intimidating. But I can talk all day. And so for me to be able to talk and dictate and use translation services or dictation directly into, say, Word was a game changer. Right. But beyond that, so that is one component of voice. So it's the recognition of what the person's saying and using it in a written format. But there's also opportunities from, say, a consumer standpoint. If you're a business that, there's a company that I know of out of Florida that's a pest control company. They enabled their Google My Business account, which they hadn't done before. And they actually saw, it was like a 700% increase in phone calls. So from 35 calls, inbound calls a day or a week, to 700 or 800. It was an amazing number. And when they started digging into the data, they actually found that people were saying, I don't want to trigger, hey G, because I don't want to trigger my device on my desk. Gotcha. Find a pest control agent around me. And so because they had enabled their Google My Business account, again, it's a local business type of a play here, but because they enabled that, Google said, okay, well, this person is available, and basically it fulfilled the transaction for them. So that's an opportunity. People are using their voice to search for information more and more. So whether it's information seeking, they're trying to make purchases. We see this behavior growing leaps and bounds every year. Yeah. Back in 2019, it was about 250 billion searches in the U.S. were actually conducted via voice. So about 13 to 15%. I expect that the 2020 numbers will be significantly above that. But think about when you're in the grocery store, or even in a Target or a Walmart or whatever, you see a lot of people on their phones like doing product lookup or pricing comparisons or whatever. They're using their voice to do it. They're not actually like, sitting there typing into whatever. So we see that behavior happening a lot. So there's a lot of opportunity in the retail space. There's a lot of opportunity for small business. There's a lot of opportunity for brands that have web presence and content that's out there to make sure that when their consumer or their customer asks for information that's related to either them or their category, that they show up and the competitor doesn't.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Now, while you were talking and you were saying how people are using this technology, the speech recognition technology, in their searches while they're doing product comparisons, there's a lot of people out there that are concerned about Big Brother when they start using these new technologies. And it's, a lot of people have not used these technologies because of that fear. I was wondering if you could speak to that a bit and maybe waylay some fears, or put those fears to rest for us.
Well, there's so much to unpack with the privacy conversation. We could certainly have our own conversation just on that topic. I think first and foremost, it's really no different than what your phone or your computer already knows about you.
Right.
In a very high level, the way devices work, listen for their wake word. Once they hear their wake word, they record the snippet. They send it back to the mothership, whether it's Amazon, Google, or Apple. It processes it on their end, finds the answer, and then sends it back to you. So there is a bit of, we have to listen in order to understand what you're saying. And then it basically will process, because they've got the supercomputers on their end. There will be a trend where you're going to start to see more of that interaction happening locally versus going back to the main companies.
Gotcha.
But again, just by nature of where AI and technology is right now, that's really how we have to create it. But it's not listening 24/7. It's not recording you and uploading all your conversations. There's none of that. I've actually had it happen to me where Susan and I were in the kitchen discussing getting the gutters cleaned, and then 5 minutes later I went on Facebook and there was an ad for a local gutter cleaner.
Right.
And so while there's no empirical evidence that shows that they're physically listening, that was a pretty interesting circumstance to happen.
Right.
Beyond that, I think the most important thing for people to know is there are responsible parties, so designers, ethicists, folks like that working at Amazon, Google, Apple, Microsoft. We happen to know a lot of them. We've made connections and friends with them over the years just by speaking at conferences.
Cool.
And they're very concerned about the topic of privacy and data security, and making sure that we do the right thing, because I think there is an industry-wide recognition that if there is one mishap, that pushes this technology back, a decade or two. So there's a belief amongst us that are in the space that we have a responsibility not only to our audience, but to the technology to make sure that future generations can actually benefit from this, and they can control, computers by speaking. And if we don't get this right, there's a very good chance that would actually set it back. There's also a group that we're part of called the Open Voice Network, and our mission is to create voice worthy of user trust. So there is a privacy task force. There are, data security experts that are working on it. We're also looking at ways to create open voice experiences so that you don't have to be hosted on Amazon or Google, and it's more of a web concept where you're basically able to use any device to access content via the web. Nice. And so there's a lot of things underway to address the privacy thing. It's really funny that voice has pushed privacy and data security to the forefront, when a lot of these issues have been with us for, basically ever since the web's existed, with cookies and trackers and ad networks and all that stuff. It's all there, but because now people know that these devices can hear what you're saying, there's a much higher level of concern. And so I think, again, the big thing to know is there's people working on this, because we want to make sure this succeeds and doesn't really run afoul of what it could do.
Awesome. And, you mentioned perception, or at least you implied perception when you were talking about that. And, it's one of those things where, as I'm an older fellow and I'm not a tech geek, and I know a lot of people that are, and I respect them deeply, because there's a lot of skill, a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, and a lot of research that has to go into that to get where you are able.
Right.
And when you progress, you tend to learn things that make you realize that what you were worried about before is not actually an issue. Because you just didn't have the right depth of knowledge in order to get to that place to have that awareness. So that brings me to the thought of a myth that, is there a myth in the industry that you'd like to speak against or debunk with respect to that?
I mean, I think the big concern that we hear time and time again is this, is Big Brother listening to us? Is the NSA tapping into our devices? I know plenty of people in the technology industry that cover up their webcam with a Post-it note or a piece of tape. And so I think, generally speaking, that's the big concern, is around privacy and making sure that, your stuff is your stuff and it's not being shared with other folks, especially without your knowledge. And so if it happens, I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen, because, you never say never, but there is a whole host of us that are working very diligently to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that there are repercussions if it does happen. So the worst that can happen, like I said, is if we run afoul and all of a sudden, Congress in the United States decides to legislate AI and voice and basically dictating how things are, going to be. So we're trying to get ahead of that so that we have ethical guidelines in place. We have the right standards and practices in place to make sure that if something happens, there's a way to police it, and we can police it as an industry and not require bigger government interventions. Right
on. That's so reassuring, because being ahead of the issue rather than, following up after it's already become an issue is huge today, because of technology, because of how fast things are progressing. I mean, if you were to go under a rock for 6 months, technologically speaking, you'd have a lot of catching up to do, man.
Well, and it's funny. So, think of it this way. It's much like texting, back in the early days of smartphone, but really just before the smartphone came out. A lot of people are like, oh, this is great. I've got a QWERTY keyboard and I can go, or a TTS keyboard, and I can go through and tap 4 times for an A or whatever it was. That's so much better than calling. I'm like, no, that's horrible. And then when the smartphone came out, it was almost like overnight, everyone was texting, and now it's just become part of our culture. Yeah. That's really kind of where we're at with voice. So, here in the States, it's anywhere between 90 and 130 million homes actually have a device. And when I say device, it could be an Alexa, it could be a Google phone, it could be a Siri phone, right? And so there's a lot of people that have these devices. The challenge is they're not quite sure what to do with it yet.
Yeah.
And so, a big part of what we're doing is trying to not only educate businesses, but also consumers and what they can do. So one big part of our process when we work with clients is, let's have a launch plan, let's have a promotion plan, let's educate people, much like we had to do in the early days of mobile apps. Here's where you go to get it. Here's what you can do with it. Here's why you want to use it. All those tenets that we did, back in 2010 through 2013, all that stuff is now relevant again, because we have this whole, the sea change or the shift in behavior that we need to help people understand what they can do. Otherwise, you create something, no one's going to really go to it. So
that's right. Yeah. Pre-education and making everybody feel comfortable.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that keeps me from talking to my phone and keeps me on the texting side. And that's one of the reasons I'm really thankful that you're here today, because you're actually helping me be more confident with my devices that had those. I've had that ability to use that on my phone for 2 or 3 phones now. And I've never embraced it, only because I thought, I'll just go with the text. But it's like apples and apples. You're not, you're just choosing the slower apple, so to speak. Right?
Well, and to that end, so it is way faster to speak than it is to type. And so that, is really, back to my book or talking about the book, that was one of the big things that came out of that. It was so much faster for me to actually speak it into existence than type. And quite honestly, on iPhone and on Android, there's a little microphone button where you can literally dictate, to the texting app what you want to say.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about that is you do notice that texts get much longer. The talk bubble gets a lot bigger because you're talking it out versus just typing it.
Right.
But you're able to get a lot more context, a lot more nuance in there, and probably have better conversations. So, so there's that component, but it's way faster and way more convenient in a lot of cases. It's not the silver bullet. It's not perfect in every case.
No.
So we're big advocates of adding voice where it makes sense for your business versus trying to replace something else with voice.
Right.
And so, make it work with what you've already got, work with your content, work with your customer journey, identify those areas where it can uniquely solve problems that maybe you haven't been able to solve before. And that's really an area to focus on, because you don't want to keep solving the same problems and
right.
Keep creating new content every time. You want to basically be able to say, all right, it's problem solved. Now, how do we address retention, or how do we address advocacy, or whatever like the goal is? Like, how can we actually start to address some of those issues, because we've got the acquisition part figured out?
Beautiful. Now, when I do a lot of work creating documents, creating content as a coach and as a content creator, lead generation, so on and so forth. And I find myself relying on Grammarly, which is an app that helps me with punctuation and grammar and so on and so forth. And I know that when we speak, the AI doesn't always get the content or the context correct. Is that improving? Has that been like an issue?
It has historically been an issue, especially if you think back to like the 90s with drag and dictate and things like that. I can say that the natural language understanding has gotten way, way better. And so we're at about 95% accuracy right now. There's actually, I don't know if you use rev.com, but it's one of the tools that exists for transcriptions. And you can upload a video and either have a human do it, where they, I think, say it's 99% accurate, or their AI system. And I believe the AI system is about 85 to 90% accurate. The cost is much lower using the AI system because it's automated, and the turnaround time's a lot faster. But there is still occasionally where it'll say inaudible, or put the wrong word in there. But for drafts and just kind of getting that first idea out, it's been a game changer for me. But generally speaking, the dictation software has gotten really, really good and really sophisticated. And I would say in most cases, unless you have a very specific domain like healthcare or legal, where there's specific words that wouldn't necessarily be part of their language understanding, you generally can do a lot of things with it.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it's one of those things too, where experience is the part that makes the difference, as well as education, because some people speak more clearly or more succinctly than others, and so that's an issue too. I'm curious, what would have been one of the biggest challenges for you to get to this point where you are now?
Well, just from a practical standpoint, understanding all of the different ways that someone can ask a question is really, really hard. And so one of the things that you need to do when you start working with AI-based systems or voice or whatever is understand that it's never going to be finished. And that you're always going to find kind of that outlier or that group of people that are asking for things in a way you never anticipated. Accents are also a big part of the challenge right now. And so if you speak, North American English, it's pretty good. If you have a Scottish accent, there's no chance in hell it's going to understand what you're saying. And that's a big challenge. And, obviously the big players are working on how do we make sure that we can recognize different accents, whether it be, Caribbean accents or, Hispanic accents or whatever. How can we make sure that we're able to serve the biggest portion of the population? And so it's funny when you talk to people off the record at certain companies, and I won't use names or anything like that, they were so concerned with trying to get it to work that they never thought through, well, what happens if I have this accent, or what happens if I have a hearing impairment? And we're talking very early on. Since then, they've certainly addressed that, and they have teams that are working on accessibility and inclusion and all the other things, but they just didn't even know like 6 years ago if the technology would even work. And so like now that they've got that working, there's all these other considerations. And, as humans and consumers, we're very impatient. We want everything working perfectly. But when you think about what it's actually doing, it's pretty amazing how quickly the technology has progressed and how good it's gotten, at least in the short time that it's been around. So I would say over the next couple of years, you're certainly going to see an improvement in language understanding across the board. You're going to see multilingual support. That's another big thing for businesses. If you've not been able to provide content in, say, Spanish or French, this is a huge opportunity for you to start serving populations that would be interested in your products or services, but maybe you didn't have the budget to actually create separate web content for them. So, nice. So there's definitely a lot of accessibility things that go along with it. And there's challenges. Like if you're hearing impaired, there's definitely considerations that we have to figure out. That's why it can't be voice only. And there's got to be ways of also having visual components to things. But again, these are all things that we're addressing and working through right now. So if it doesn't work perfectly now, please be patient, because as an industry, we're working on it, and know that we're working on it.
Very cool, very cool. I have a step niece that is deaf, and her speaking and her texting is a challenge to understand because she's deaf. And, and it's one of those things where until you realize she's hearing impaired, you're thinking, what's wrong with this person? Why aren't they getting it, clear? And
right.
I understand that that's a big challenge when it comes to AI. That's going to get into a place where it's going to be error.
Well, and that's actually something that Google is working a lot on, is making sure that people with all different types of abilities can use these systems. So whether it's different ways of speaking because of hearing impairments or cognitive issues or whatever, there's a whole team there that are actually working to train the models to understand people better. And yeah, it's a huge issue. And when you think about, I think it's something like 15% of all Americans have some sort of hearing loss. That's a part of the population that if you're just doing things through voice, 100%. And so, like, what do you do to make sure that they're also able to access the information? It's very similar to the website idea and people with vision impairments. Like, generally speaking, not a lot of people have taken the time and effort to make sure that their websites are accessible. The interesting thing is when you think about like an Alexa or a Google Assistant, they're basically screen readers. So if you've taken the time to create accessible web content, there's a good chance that these devices would also be able to read it. And so at least you're ahead of the game in that case. But accessibility is a huge concern. And it should be very top of mind when people are thinking through solutions and how do we make sure that what we create works for as many people as we possibly can versus excluding a group because of different abilities.
And of course, the percentage would, generally speaking, when we're dealing with this sort of technology and big companies, they go with the majority and they kind of let the smaller percentages fall off, and they don't even always pay attention to those smaller percentages. So yeah, I really appreciate the fact that what you're sharing with us talks to that where the smaller percentages are being considered. This is very, very interesting. I'm very, very intrigued by all the nuances that are involved in all of this. And I'm curious, what is the one thing that you, as an entrepreneur and as a leader in this industry, are you trying to accomplish?
Honestly, what we're trying to do is get businesses comfortable with investing in voice experiences at this point. The consumers are there. We already know that they're there and they're using these devices, whether it's here in the States or in Canada, the UK, like we have numbers from all over the world that show that people are actually using this. And so it's really identifying the right businesses that are ready to take advantage of it now and not waiting until 2023, 2024, when everyone's doing it. This is very much like the early days of mobile, where those chosen few who actually take that leap and start investing now are going to be so much further ahead of everyone else by the time that the industry catches up. So really where we've been focusing a lot of our effort as of late, really the past year, is helping businesses, agency owners, identify where it makes sense to get started with voice within their existing organization. And so we're big proponents of if we can repurpose content, let's repurpose content. If you have, audience research, let's use that. Let's figure out where it makes the most sense, because we want to give you a quick ROI story so that you can actually get, if you need to go to the CMO or the CEO and say, hey, this is what we did here. We want to go through and roll out this program across the enterprise. Like, you have to have that story. So we're trying to partner with businesses and brands and agencies, like I said, because a lot of times they have relationships with those brands, but helping them understand this is where you can get started. And here's how to make it less painful.
Yeah.
I think there's also this perception because it's technology, it's going to be this whole new thing that we have to do. And so we actually have taken the time to map out a process that's very similar if you've ever done a website or a mobile application, and then also audio and video production. It kind of takes the best of all those different processes and puts it together. So
Beautiful.
as a brand person, you can go, oh, I can do this. It's not really that different from what I already do. And so we try to demystify things as much as possible to make people comfortable and ready to get going. So
Awesome. You mentioned something earlier about having a technology read out an Audible, a website, for example, where a visually impaired person can't see what's on the website.
Right.
So is that actually, kind of perked up my ears. I thought, oh, I wouldn't mind investing in that sort of thing for my website, because there's a lot of content on my website, and it's all, if you can't read it, it means nothing to you.
Right.
So is that something that's offered as well?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So if you have vision impairment, you're probably working with a screen reader or a screen reader app on your phone already. And so if the content is built properly, it'll read through the text for them and also help them navigate. But
Beautiful.
beyond that, there's actually tools that'll work with WordPress, like a plugin that you basically have a little button at the top that says read this article to me, and you hit it, and as the person sitting there, you can actually listen to it. And yeah, it's using a computer generated voice, but there is a way to have the content read to you now, and it works on mobile, it works on desktop.
Awesome. When we get off screen, I'm going to want to know more about that. Unless you know it. You just said the plugin. There's a WordPress plugin.
There's actually a few different. So yeah, I could definitely share it with you, and then if you'd like, we can add it to the show notes as well.
Beautiful. All right, my brother, we're getting close to over 30 minutes, and I don't want to keep you too long. And of course, we all know that everybody's attention span is limited, so we don't want to keep them too long either. Everybody has a busy day. So I just wanted to know, is there any call to action you'd like to share with the audience today?
Yeah,
I'm going to go through where you can be found. So you go ahead and just talk about it while I'm going through all these different links.
Well, so the link you have on the screen right now is actually for a private group that we've created specifically for agency leadership and brands and brand marketers, basically digital marketers, so they can start to understand what the opportunity for voice is for their situation. So, we've got right now about 30 folks in it, and we're adding folks every day. But it's really us trying to create a community around understanding where technology can actually play, and specifically where voice can play for those businesses and brands. And so if anyone that's watching this is interested, definitely click on this link, or there's a link that Dean will have on the screen in a moment, where you can see how to actually get into our Facebook community. But it's an exclusive thing. We're not opening it up to the entire world. It's specifically around agency owners, leadership in agencies, and brands that are looking to, basically figure out where technology can fit for them.
Beautiful. And I think this one here, the bit.ly link, is the one that'll have everybody going where everything you have is in that link, I'm sure.
Yeah. So it's like a link tree where basically link to the Facebook communities there, my emails there. Learning more about our book, that link is there as well. So this is kind of the one-stop shop for everything Scott.
Beautiful. And then we got your Twitter link where everybody can get to you on Twitter, and then we have the LinkedIn link where everybody can find you on LinkedIn. And of course, we're talking to Scot Westwater, CCO, Chief Creative Officer and co-founder of Pragmatic Digital. And this is, again, I'm just going to leave that on the screen I'll leave that on the screen, and I'm going to share a beautiful little ending video that I love so much about there's an owl coming up, and I showed Scott that earlier, and that end actually created a bit of a conversation. But I really appreciate you being here today, Scott. It was extremely informative.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm super, super stoked for the way this is going to end up impacting the world. And I'm so thankful that you're in that place where you're leading edge, and what you're doing is going to change the world, my brother. And I'm really thankful that I know you, and that we're going to be changing the world together in our own way. So that's awesome. Thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. I'm honored to be here, Dean. Thank you.
Awesome. So cool. And by all means, if you have any need for Scott's technology as help or anything like that, everything's in the show notes as well. And I showed everything on the screen, so you can just pause the replay or anything that you need to do to get a hold of Scott. If you can't get a hold of Scott, get a hold of me, and I'll help you get a hold of Scott. And let's change the way business is done in the world today. Awesome, Scott. Really appreciate you today, my friend. Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.